Chief Wakera, and they promised that they would never divulge the location of these mines. Now, years had gone by, and this is back in the 50s, and there was a woman who was a descendant. Her name was Mary, and she had the Rhodes map. Now, if you look at almost any treasure book that has Spanish treasure in the Uintas, you're going to find the Bullock map. And it's the Rhodes map, and my grandfather was prepared to spend $10,000 to buy that map from Mary. She changed her mind because, after all, there was a promise that they wouldn't divulge the location of the mine. But when you look at that map, it's just about as vague as any treasure map you've ever looked at. It shows some ridges, it shows 3 X's, and it could be anywhere, but it's recorded that it's west of Moon Lake. And so west of Moon Lake, somewhere, and who knows if it's north or south, is this Rhodes Pine Mine. Now, you would know the pine mine, it's named that because there was a big pine tree that the Spaniards, or maybe a Rhodes, had carved into the bark of that tree. They carved Oro 1856. And so my father, who was much younger at that time, he was able to hike up into the Uintas, and his father, Benjamin Hart Bullock, located that mine by the use of instruments. And I'm going to show you the instrument that he used. He started dowsing, and he dowsed with willow sticks. And he was able to locate water, and he was very successful in locating water for farmers. And he got to thinking, I wonder if I put metal on the end of that stick, if I could find gold. And so he used a willow stick, it was a green willow, and on the end of it he put a gold nugget, taped it on there, and he found that it worked, but not so well. And so he got an idea, and this was before McDonald's time in Utah, but he made kind of a handle and a brass rod. He got some crystal glass. I think these were dental floss bottles at one time. But he soldered a cap on the end of the rod, and then he got bottles and he put all the metals he thought he'd need to look for. He's got a whole load of metals in there, if you can see it. There's all these little bottles in this case. So he's not only got minerals in there. I found a bottle, it's titled Spirit of the Lord. So if you're looking for the Spirit of the Lord, you screw it on the end of this rod and you let it go and do its work. Now there's another one in that case that says male, M-A-L-E. And I always used to joke because I inherited that, and I thought, well, maybe my grandpa was like Cupid, and he'd look for women that were single. But what I did find out was that he could use that vial to determine whether or not a pregnant woman was going to have a boy or a girl. I hardly dare tell you what he used to determine that. But he was able to procure foreskin from a circumcision, and he put it in that bottle, and he used that to locate whether a woman was going to have a boy or a girl. Now, I've never heard a story about his finding a man for any woman, but on this, he's got gold. And this is supposedly Uinta Mountain gold, and the closer to the gold body you're looking for, if you have that mineral, that you're searching for and it's from that area, it'll be a lot more effective. But what he would do is he would just begin by holding it and pointing it out, and pretty soon that would start to wiggling and jiggling. He called it a doodle bug. And it would start pulling towards the gold body. Now this feels like it's pulling towards the left, and so he would rotate around a little bit until it would settle down. Okay. And then if he gets on line with the gold body, it's going to bounce like this. Now he got so good at it, well, I tell you, you got a heart of gold, don't you? That's really going crazy on you. I was up in the mountains with a Navajo, I think, an Indian, and he's an earth talker. An earth talker is just that. He would read or almost talk to the earth. And when I was out with him, there was this big boulder in a field, and it was a long ways away from a mountain, so I knew that big boulder had no way of rolling down the mountain and rolling about 200 yards. There's just no way that boulder would get there. It had to be put there by somebody. It had to be a marker, and I've always believed that great big boulder was a marker. Well, we drove past that boulder, and Burl, who was the Indian, he looked at that and he said, "Stop." And so I stopped, and he looked over at that boulder and he said, "That's a marker." And I said, "Well, what's it a marker for?" And he says, "It's a marker to tell who's ever searching for something that they're on the right path." And so he didn't mention much more about that, but all the way up the mountain, he was talking Indian, and he was talking to the earth. Well, we had a mine that I worked in when I was a youth. It was called the Golden Relief. And the reason that they started this mine was that back in around 1913, there was a man by the name of Johnny Rasmussen, and he came from Old Mexico, and he had a map and an explanation that he found in his great-grandfather's attic. Now, this map indicated that there were 3 trappers, and I think that they were rendezvoused somewhere around Grantsville, Utah. And the season was getting pretty tight. They weren't finding the beaver pelts they needed. So what they decided to do was split up into 3 groups of 3. And they went out north, south, east, and west. And Johnny Rasmussen's great-grandfather, he went with 2 men, and they went along the Wasatch Front from the Great Salt Lake along the sides of the Utah Lake, which at that time was a freshwater lake, beautiful lake. And they described that about 1.5 miles past the end of that lake was, they were in the foothills. And they were just exploring rivers looking for sign of beaver, ermine, or whatever other critters that they could make money off of their fur. So they got down to where it looked like the valley was going to close. The mountains, the foothills, they wrapped around, and then there were other foothills on the other side that wrapped around, and it just looked like the valley was going to close. And they saw a band of Indians that were coming north, and the Indians saw them before they saw the Indians, and the attack was on. Now it scared these trappers. They were on horses. They went up, pushed their horses up higher, up into the foothills, and they got up there in the foothills, and one of the Indians lobbed an arrow, and it hit in the back of one of the trappers. And just shortly after that, one of the trappers saw a badger come out of a rather large hole in the ground. And they thought, that's what we need to do. We need to hide down in that hole. And so they rode their horses up to it, jumped off their horses, helped their companion down into that hole, swatted their horses on the butts, and off the horses ran. and they crawled down pulling sagebrush and bush that they could break off to try to cover up that hole. Well, while they were down there, there was a lot of nesting material, enough material that after several days, because Indians have a lot of patience, and if they're after you, they'll eventually get you, especially if you don't have any horses. And so they were very careful, and they were down there inside of this, almost a cavern. It opened up into a cavern, and they decided that it was time to make a small fire and get warm. Well, they built this small fire, and to their amazement, in looking into this cavern, there were hundreds of gold bars stacked up against the wall. Now, they were so excited, they went to pick up one of those gold bars, and it must have weighed around 80 pounds, and they couldn't carry it. They were thinking, no horse, 100 miles back to the rendezvous, there's no way that we'll survive by carrying an 80-pound bar of gold. And so what they did, their partner passed away, and they didn't want the animals to ravage his body, so they dragged his body back where the gold bars were, and they pulled those bars down, and they covered up their companion with gold bars. That would be my dream of a nice resting place. So anyway, they felt safe enough to finally leave, and they wondered, what can we do about these gold bars? And so they said, well, the only thing we can do, as soon as we can get pencil and paper, we need to write down all of the markers along the way so we can find that gold when we are back in this area and we have horses. So they wrote out a description, and one of the descriptions was that it was among juniper or cedar trees, juniper trees, and another was it was below red ledges. And so he had come, Johnny Rasmussen had come north, and he talked to people that were involved in the Dream Mine. And if you have ever heard about the Dream Mine, it's a fascinating story about Bishop Coyle. Coyle had made a lot of prophecies that came true. One of them being the Great Depression. The other was the First World War, the Second World War. And the church threatened to excommunicate him unless he quit talking those kind of talks. And my grandfather, he didn't want Coyle to lose his claims. And the church wouldn't allow him to go out and refile on his mine claims. So my grandfather got a horse, and he got the claim notices, and he rode to Salem, Utah, where the Dream Mine is, went up into the foothills, and he began claiming all of Bishop Coyle's claims. Now, he wasn't claim jumping. What he did, since Coyle couldn't do it, my grandfather got all of Coyle's properties reclaimed, and he filed it in Coyle's name and saved the Dream Mine. Now, I understand the Dream Mine is shut down now, but it is really quite the story. If you get a chance to watch it on YouTube or find any books on the Dream Mine, they're fascinating. Well, Rasmussen talked to these people with the Dream Mine, and all of them were, praise the Lord, this is the right spot, this is the place. And Johnny Rasmussen said, I don't think so. There aren't any cedar trees, and there's no red ledges. Well, there was one of the officials at the Dream Mine, his name was Lars Olson. He went to Johnny Rasmussen afterward, and he told him that there was another mine about 15 miles south, and that the owner of that mine was searching for the same thing. Imagine that my grandfather was searching for hidden gold right in the same area. Now, the reason my grandfather was searching is he had one of these. This is his. And he was able to locate that there was a large deposit of gold in there. And when Rasmussen came along, they went down there and everything matched. They talked about a sugar loaf knoll, and there was the sugar loaf. About a 3/4 of a mile south of the sugar loaf is where this badger hole is. It's where the gold is. And so they began looking, and they went up in there, and Grandpa, he dug this one tunnel, and he hit water. And normally, anywhere around here, if you dig a tunnel, you're going to hit water. And he had so much water, he decided to shift the location. And so he ran another tunnel that was just a bit to the west of it, or the north, I should say. And so he was working on that tunnel when Johnny Rasmussen got with him, and they were in earnest looking for this treasure. Never found it. Altogether, he put 4 tunnels back in the mountain. One of them he put back in about 45 feet, and then he made a 90 degree, and he started going around, skirting around the brow of the mountain, looking for this pocket that had the gold in it. And he's never been able to find it. But it's one of the famous treasure stories right along the Wasatch Front down there east of Santa Quin. And I had some gentlemen come up from Las Vegas, and they had a machine that would send signals down into the soil up to about 100 feet. And it was like a lawnmower, and they would push this thing across the mine dump, across where they thought that the gold was, and they didn't get any indication at all. Well, Verrill, the Indian that was the earth talker, he didn't go over to the mine dump that I wanted to show everybody that had come along. And I was telling him this is an ancient mine dump. There's a lot of carbon in it. And the ancients, the Spaniards, they would heat up the tunnel with fire. They'd heat the rock up, and then they'd douse the rock with cold water, and it would fracture the rock, and then they could pull it out. And that's how they mined. But the mine dump was loaded with carbon from the fires that they had built. Well, I thought everybody was going to be interested in that. But Verrill, he walked up to a point that when I was a little boy, my grandfather took me up there to it, and he said, "Davy, right down there, beneath our feet is where the trapper is buried under gold bars." And I'll be darned if Verrill wasn't standing in the same spot, and he says, "Dan." Now, Dan was one of the other gentlemen that wanted to come up and do some exploration. He says, "Dan, bring your gold checker." Well, Dan had it was a ball-bearing type of metal detector that would pivot, and he was just carrying it in his hands, so the rod was pointing down to the gravity of the earth. He had a vial on the end of it that had gold in it, and he was walking up there, and as he got up to that point where Verrill was, that gold checker defied gravity, and it just stood out in the air and pointed at about a 30-degree angle. And so this is why the men came up from Las Vegas, and they did their work there. They couldn't find any evidence of gold, and they abandoned it. Well, my father passed away. My brothers didn't want anything to do with the mine. They were concerned that somebody was going to spelunk back into those mine tunnels, get caved in on, and we were going to get sued. And so they decided that they were going to sell the mine property. Now, it's a whole mountain. If you know what Dry Mountain is, where it is, my grandfather had all of that mountain in patented mineral claims. Well, my brothers decided that the best way to sell that land was to let the mineral claims go with it. And I fought with them, I argued with them. I wanted to buy my own piece of land and build my retirement home there. I had dreams of living there, and I wanted the mineral rights. And they wouldn't sell them to me. They wouldn't let me buy my own land because they said it was more valuable if it was a bigger parcel of land, which is true. Well, the minute they put it on the market, there were a couple of policemen from Santa Quin that were up in the foothills target practicing, and there was a ricochet bullet that started a fire, and that fire grew and burned up all of the timber clear up to the top of Dry Mountain. It was like, oh, you shouldn't have put that land up for sale, because now, instead of worth $2 million, it was worth less than $1 million, because all of the brush, all of the cedar trees, the scrub oak trees, they had burned, the timber had burned, and the next year when the rains came, there were gully washers that came down, they flooded houses, it wiped out roads and canals, and it was just an awful mess. And my family, they were still happy because they had people interested in buying that land. Well, the reason it had so much interest was because the value of that property had dropped so low. All you had to do is be an investor, somebody with a little bit of money, and you could go in there and buy that property, let it sit for a while for all the greenery to come back, and you'd have yourself one heck of a piece of real estate to subdivide. Well, somebody who was the neighbor that we had down there, they started growing fruit trees. And the elk and the deer were devastating to their fruit trees. And these kids, they'd grown up with the story of the Sugarloaf Gold. And so they themselves, they owned the mineral rights on that parcel of land. And so they started looking for it, and it wasn't much later that they had cleared an area out below those red ledges that you could build a house on. They'd really moved a lot of dirt, and before I knew it, there was a huge fence, an elk fence, that went all around their property, and they planted thousands of fruit trees. What better way to launder gold than to plant fruit trees and make money from the fruit, and also to sell a little gold on the side. And I firmly believe that the Sugarloaf Gold has been discovered, and somebody's smart enough not to brag about it. So that's the story of the Sugarloaf Gold. Now I've got another story that happened back in 1958. My grandfather purchased that map I was talking about, and they started looking for the pine mine, the Lost Rhodes mine, one of the most famous lost mines in North America. Grandpa used the doodle bug, and by indications on the doodle bug, he knew which direction to go and how to get to it. So my dad, who was a lot healthier and younger, my grandfather had a broken hip and he had a hard time walking. And so my dad, with the doodle bug, went up and he finished off and made a claim of about 18 mineral claims. Now a claim is 600 feet by 1,500 feet. And so when you get 15 to 20 claims, that's an awful large tract of land. And what they did is they looked for the tree, because there was supposed to be a big pine tree, and all over up here in the Uintas, there's these pine trees and quaking aspen trees that the Spaniards did markings on, and they carved symbols so that who's coming up after them would be able to read those symbols and know where to go and how to get there. They even had symbols that marked where the treasure or where a cache was buried. So my dad located the tree, It was still standing. It had Oro 1856 carved into it, and close to that tree was a depression in the earth. Now, the map indicated that there were 3 mines. Well, I think all 3 mines have been found. They just don't know that they found them. But my grandfather and my dad located this mine called the Pine Mine. It was kind of covered over with sticks. My dad, he cleared the sticks away. He saw that it was really narrow. He said it had to have been dug by small women or even children. And we know that the Spaniards enslaved the Indians and they forced them to work in the mines. Now, my dad finally got a long piece of rope and he tied it around his ankle. And then, using the rope, he started lowering himself down into this mine shaft. I don't know how deep he went, but he saw where they had been chiseling, and they chiseled a large gold vein off the side of this shaft. And this large gold vein went all across and disappeared into the mountain. And so my dad got out his prospector's pick and he started picking away, and he came away with a large rock that was quartz, and it was kind of a rotten quartz. There were some parts of it that were real solid white quartz crystals, and then the rest of it was kind of grainy, and it would break up, but it was loaded with gold. Now, he was pretty excited, and he didn't want to break any part of that rock, and he still had to climb up out of that hole. And that's the predicament, you know, when you don't want to let go of something that's so precious and it ends up taking your life. Well, that's about where he was. That was his situation. He didn't want to sacrifice that large bit of gold. And so he figured out that if he just unbuttoned his shirt, tucked it down into his shirt, that he would be able to climb out. Well, that's right where the rope was, and that rock was just cutting into his chest and hurting, but it just didn't bother him at all. And he crawled out of the mine. He was, hallelujah, hallelujah, I've found the mine, I've got the gold. He went back home, and my dad was a lion. He was a member of the Lions Club. He was also friends with people in the Elks Club and the Rotary Club. And he volunteered to bring this big chunk of golden quartz and show it off. Because what he was really trying to do is get some investment money. You know, you can't run a mine for free. It costs money. You have to hire men. You have to buy equipment. And so he was passing this rock around, and like I say, a lot of it was a rotten quartz. It was easy to break off. And he says, you know, that rock got smaller and smaller. And he finally realized that these honest boys that he was showing his sample to were breaking off chunks of it and taking the gold. So he took it home. He got a hammer, and he just beat the gold out of that rock. He took all of the gold. Now, that's not to say that there wasn't more gold in the mine, but he took all of that gold and he melted it down into a big button about that big around. Well, he couldn't very easily say, you know, here's the rock the gold was in, this is the gold I found. But he was still determined to get back up there to that mine. And there was a notice in several newspapers, the Duchesne newspaper down there in Salt Lake newspaper, that announced that Bullock Mining Development had discovered the Lost Rhodes mine. Probably shouldn't have gotten worded, because when Dad, he hired a couple of horses the farmer brought them from Roosevelt. They got the horses, and there was a team of men. There was my grandpa. He could hardly walk. And my dad says, well, just grab a hold of the horse's tail, Ben, and the horse will pull you up the mountain. And that's how Grandpa made it up the mountain. And all of these men, they needed the help of that horse too. And there was just a whole bunch of men that were hanging on to the tail of these two horses. And they got up to the mine, and it was destroyed. Somebody had come in there with apparently a bulldozer, and they had filled up the mine shaft. They pushed over the pine tree. It was destroyed. Well, my dad and my grandfather thought that it was the Indians that did it. And the last thing they wanted was trouble with the Indians. My grandfather put his arm around his son and he said, let's go home, son. This is bigger than the two of us. Well, it took me, and this was in '58. Well, that's quite a few years, but it took me all the way until last year to really find out what happened. Well, there were some scallywags, I'll call them, claim jumpers, and they figured that what they would do before Bullock could get back up on that mountain and pull out all the treasures that were supposed to be down in the bottom of that shaft, they figured that they would use a bulldozer and they would cut that shaft down, they would open it up, they'd be able to go in, get the gold, and yahoo, run away with it. And so that's what happened. It wasn't really Indians that did that at all, but it was the fear of what the Indians could do that caused my dad and my grandfather not to pursue any more mining of the Rhodes mine. Now last year, came up here and I met some wonderful people, and they took me up to the Bullock mine. And that Bullock mine, it was absolutely in line with the claim notices where you give a description of where the mine is. And so they were of the opinion that that was the Rhodes mine that had been destroyed. And I didn't feel comfortable about it because it was in the wrong spot as far as my recollection of what my father told me. But my father didn't want me to be a miner. Mining was really a hard work to do. He'd been blown up in the mines, he'd had accidents. He had a partner that worked by his side for years, and they developed what was called the Utah Galena mine. It was out in the Tinnick Mining District. Now the Utah Galena went down, I believe, 647 feet. And they were working a drift down there, and they had a couple of drifts that they had run, and they were working this drift, and the shift was over. It was time to go, and this partner of his, it was his last day. And there's a superstition among miners: don't ever work your last day. I'd recommend that at any employment. If you're going to quit on the 14th, don't show up to work. What are they going to do? Fire you? So anyway, they had the end of shift. They were in the lift cage. That's an elevator for you city folks. And they were in that lift cage, and they were being hoisted up the shaft. And the cage, something was wrong with the cable, and it slipped and they dropped. And I'm not quite sure how far they dropped, but boy, I tell you, when you got a 600-foot shaft that you can fall down, 1 foot drop's enough to scare you. Well, once again, that lift started going up and they were breathing easy, and then it dropped, and it dropped even farther than before. And my dad's partner says, I'm getting out of here. And he stepped off of the lift cage onto the ladder, and just as he did that, the cage moved and it knocked him off of the ladder, and he fell for over 600 feet all the way to the bottom of the shaft. When they found him, he had been decapitated. And it just broke my dad's heart. And it was one of the worst mining tragedies, but I don't think you'll ever even find it in any old newspapers or anything, because there was so much development in the Tinnick mining district, they didn't want any negative press. Now, my dad, he had a mine in the Tinnick mining district. It was called the Tinnick Standard, and it's another famous mine. But it wasn't what my grandfather owned it. He was just pouring money into a hole in the ground. And he wanted the syndicate mine, where he got a lot of heavy readings with his dowsing rod, the doodle bug, and he wanted to go back into the syndicate mine. The original syndicate mine was a mine shaft, and there was a lot of galena, which is silver lead ore. Now, they had mined this shaft, and they thought it would be so much easier if we just bought that syndicate mine and just turned a little bit, and we'd go underneath that body of silver lead ore, and we'd be able to stope it down. And it'd be so much easier than hauling it up. So that's what my grandfather did. He traded the Tinnick Standard mine for the syndicate mine. It wasn't much later, after about 100 feet of working in the Tinnick Standard mine, the new owners struck gold. And the Tinnick Standard is a famous mine in the Tinnick mining district. It made millions and millions of dollars. And the syndicate mine, now it's caved in, it's hard to get into, and it didn't make any money at all. So anyway, there's a book that was written by Gail R. Rhodes and Carrie Ross Boren. It's titled Footprints in the Wilderness, A History of the Lost Rhodes Mine. Now this book was written by these two gentlemen, a descendant of Thomas Rhodes and a treasure hunter who had written books and published books. And I would admonish anyone that wanted to write a book about anything really, do your research. Don't just make it a fantastic story. I've been a storyteller for 40 years, and I have some of the most unbelievable stories that are true. And I've got stories that are just incredible, even more so, and they're not true. Well, this book has a chapter in it about the pine mine, and it talks about how my dad and grandfather, this is a picture of my grandfather, this book talks about how they brought in a bulldozer trying to take a shortcut to finding the treasure, and they destroyed the mine. Now my dad, he was interested to find out what the book said, so he bought a copy of it, and boy, I tell you, he sure got mad. I bet you he used one of them words, my mom said were a naughty word. And so anyway, he got in touch with Gail Rhodes, one of the authors of this book, and he said, "You've slandered the Bullock name. You've slandered our corporation. You've brought wrath upon us, and I want you to correct it." And so it was a correspondence between Rhodes and my grandfather, and this is a letter from Rhodes, and he says, "Just a few lines to let you know that I'm in the process of completing the second edition of our book, Footprints in the Wilderness, A History of the Lost Rhodes Mines. And I remember your letter of October 25th, 1971, whereby you pointed out to me that our story about your father Ben was not entirely accurate. Now there's the first misstatement that continued to tick my dad off. It wasn't entirely accurate. He says, my appeal here that you put down on paper the story as you know it and send it to me as soon as possible, that I might get the true story this time. It shouldn't take too long for you to do this, and I'd greatly appreciate it. Certainly, you'd be more pleased with that portion of the book. Well, my dad wasn't pleased at all with that portion of the book. Says I've completed 19 chapters this far, and I'm just beginning the chapter entitled The Endless Search. It is in this chapter that we speak of your father. As you can probably tell, we've added a great deal of new information in this second edition. The first edition only had a total of 14 chapters. This one will have about 20. And I plan to have it finished for the publisher before May. And this is in January, so there's not a lot of time. Thank you for your cooperation in this matter, and I'll be looking forward to hearing from you soon. Well, my dad wasn't too happy with the authors of this book. And I'll be darned if he wanted to help them to tell any more truth than what he expected that there be told. If they had just contacted him and talked to him to get the story, the real story, everything would have been fine. But these authors, they want to embellish, they want to make it sound like something happened that didn't happen. And it was published and printed. It really hurt my grandfather from developing other mines because there were people that wanted to invest money, and they didn't want to invest money with somebody that would destroy such a sacred and famous mine as the Lost Rhodes Pine Mine. Well, my dad, he didn't give him any more information than what he wanted them to have. They tell the story about there's a Powell Jr., Powell Sr., and a man named Foote. And Foote was going to take these men up into the mountain and show them where the Pine Mine was. Well, on their trip up into the mountain, the relatives, I don't remember if they're brothers or whatever, but they got in an argument that upset Mr. Foote. And so he started to leave. And where are you going? Oh no, we want you to stay. We'll quit fighting. We're not going to argue over this. I promise we're going to be good, little boys. And so he decided that he'd stay. And the next day, they were getting closer to the mine, and one of these men, one of the pals, made the comment, once we find it, all we need to do is thump you on the head, and we'll have all that gold to ourselves. Well, was he joking? Do you say something like that to somebody that's going to show you to a $1 million fortune? So in the middle of the night, Mr. Foote got up, and he got on his horse, and he ran away from there. He got out of Dodge. And the book, this book, says how my grandfather met up with Foote, and Foote realized he was in the search of the same mine these other two gentlemen were in search of, and they made an agreement to where if Foote showed him where the mine was, that he would get a silent partnership and he would get some money out of it. Well, there's no truth to that whatsoever. My grandfather never met Mr. Foote. And the stories that are told in the book in this particular situation was all fabricated and supposition. And it just made my dad so mad that he didn't help out these authors to do any better at telling the story. And a lot of the story in this is incomplete and it's inaccurate. They wrote the second edition of the book, and skillfully corrected what they had reported before. It says here that although the other two miners were never located by the Bullock Mines, Metals, and Oil Corporation, there remains little doubt but what they did locate with Foote's valuable help, Caleb Rhodes' Pine Mine, a mine so often mentioned among Caleb's mineral leases, agreements, and maps. Now, he just didn't want to help these authors. And I have got probably all of the treasure hunting and treasure seeking books, and I look at those, and I know the story of some of these mines. I know the story of some of these maps. And if one author overlays where the Pine Mine is, and I'll be darned if that Pine Mine isn't right just a few thousand yards away from the house I live in up Weaver Canyon. And everybody knows that the Pine Mine wasn't that far west and it wasn't that far north, that it was west of Moon Lake, about 3.5 miles. And so if you want to get out your tape measures and take a hike, it's going to be a long hike. But anyway, you can go 3.5 miles west of Moon Lake, and you can find more than one Spanish mine. There's quite a few up in there. And I hope that when you do, you find the treasure that you're looking for. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share some stories with you. I'm really happy that I was able to be here. Thank you a lot.